Hey, what's up, guys? We're back for another episode. Are we on episode 10 now?
Episode 10.
This is our
Yeah,
number.
moving
This
on.
is number 10. Can't believe it. Can't believe we've got that much to say, to be honest.
Maybe people would argue we don't.
Yeah, too much to say.
So,
Yeah. They're like, would you guys go to a monthly release, please? That's funny.
every January,
Yeah.
once a year.
Once a year, that's all they want to hear from us. Well, just tune in, just listen to one episode a year. Still subscribe, still like, share, and follow, but only listen to one every January or something like that. But anyways, well, Mike, how are you doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah,
Just here, getting ready to come up to you in a few days, really.
we're gonna have a good time. We need to try to remember to get some video so that we can share it to the channel.
Cool.
Help me
Yeah.
remember that.
Yeah, I will.
So yeah, that's great. I'm excited to see you. It'll be fun, I'm sure, for you to get away from the Vegas heat. Where like we hit 70, a high of like 78 today. By the weekend, we'll be closer to the 80s. So should be really warm, but nothing that we can't handle in nice weather or with good training and good location. So really looking forward to it.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah. So you and I had talked a lot about some ideas for this next episode, and kind of, I mean, help me here. But the one that I feel like we both agreed on, or that made sense to both of us, was talking and balancing out. Like, obviously, our podcast is the full quadrant. We talk about everything from the use of punishment to the use of reinforcement, everything in between. Um, and I think we both agreed that it would be a good conversation for us to tackle some of the unique, nuanced approaches to using reinforcement and methods that are going to be conducive for good emotion within the dog, that create flash, that create the highly desirable aesthetic of a happy dog doing behaviors. So let's jump into that and talk about that. And why don't you kick it off and give me some of your thoughts about what you think is valuable?
When you have some kind of motivator, right, like some kind of reinforcer that the dog really likes, you can overcome a lot when it comes to training. And if you only go, oh, well, let me go back. You can come overcome a lot, especially when you're making small mistakes, right, in training, uh, and maybe creating too much frustration, or maybe adding a little bit too much pressure when the dog's not ready. You can take a step back, and that's where, like, going in and out of the different quadrants, right? Going positive reinforcement quadrant to the negative reinforcement, and going and keeping it balanced so that you keep the motivation at the highest level. And if it comes down because of too much pressure or because of frustration or something, you can bring it back with your positive reinforcement. Now, the one thing though with positive reinforcement is you create that very, I mean, that, like, I don't want to say like the dopamine dog, but although you are, but the dog that is not really concentrating on what it's doing. The kind of crazy, like all he can think of is that reward.
They're consumed with the finish line and not with the journey to the finish line.
Yeah. And I think that's where the, like, what we talked about before, the balance comes in, where you can't just have a positive only, a reinforcement only dog. I mean, there are dogs that you'll be fine with, but there's some dogs that it's too much, right? You have to add a little bit of the pressure to bring in the concentration, and then show them, like, hey, you have to wait in order to get this. You have to calm down. You have to relax into the behaviors that are going to get you the reward you want, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where you see it a lot if you watch like the especially the Popo Nate training, where the dog is just out of its mind, right, for that reward. And it does even in the you put it in a down and it's just like it's shaking, it can't control itself, you know. And I think there's a difference between controlling it, controlling that motivation with some pressure, or like kind of capping it, you know. And just to be clear, when I say capping, I mean it's like you're barely controlling it. You're barely holding on to the dog, you know. Whereas you could technically say you're capping the other way too, but the what I've noticed is that the dog that you've added pressure to from the beginning is more controlled, and it still explodes into the, you know, or out of that behavior to the next one with as much power, but it's not that, like, what I would call like a drug addict, like looking for its next, you know, fix kind of thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think, yes, I follow. I wonder if maybe we take a step back and just talk about the definition of the quadrant. So positive reinforcement, actually, it's not some, there's a lot of misunderstandings about that quadrant, even though it's got to be the most popular quadrant in today's approach to training a dog. It's hands down the most popular quadrant, right? Treat training, reinforcement training, toy training, play training, whatever you use, you know, pre-mac or whatever, you're using positive reinforcement. You're using something to reinforce a
A
bridged
behavior.
behavior, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so a lot of people, when they understand the quadrant, again, not that B.F. Skinner invented it, he just put the labels on it. He observed the phenomenon and he labeled it. So he didn't create it, obviously, which a lot of people say, like, oh, well, B.F. Skinner didn't come. Be quiet. And so those petty criticisms aside, a lot of people will read the quadrant and they'll see we use R for reinforcement, the two reinforcement quadrants, right? But they interchangeably use reinforcement and reward. But reward is not synonymous with reinforcement and vice versa, right? You can reward something without something being reinforced. And that's a concept that a lot of people are going to hear and they might disagree with, but scientifically, it's absolutely true. Now, people say, oh, well, reinforcement is the same thing as reward. It's not, because you're looking at the act of giving something versus the consequence increasing in strength.
Yes.
Make sense?
Yeah. The reinforcement is where you make something stronger. You reinforce the behavior, right?
Yep.
Whereas the reward is that the thing that you give.
It was something that was given. If
Yeah.
if if you end up net positive, that's reward, right? And just because you end up, like, say the dog gets 3 treats or the dog gets to chase the frisbee 3 times, right? That may or may not be reinforcing to a behavior that preceded that event. It could in some situations, it very well could, but it's not mutually exclusive. It does not always mean anytime a reward is present that a behavior gets strengthened. You have to look at the behavior before you know whether the reward was reinforcing or not.
Yeah. And one example of that is if your dog does a fast down, okay, and it was expecting the ball, and say the ball is like the highest reward you can give, right? If it's expecting the ball and it did a very fast down, it expects the ball and you give it one piece of kibble, you did not reinforce that behavior because it didn't get what it expected, right? It's just like if you do a job where I have given you $100 for that job every time I've asked you to do it. Okay. So every time you're like, oh, I'm gonna get $100, you do your best job. I'm gonna get $100, you do your best job. And it's true. And then one day you do even better. You're like, hey, let me see if I do better if I can get more than 100. And you do better than every other time, and I give you $1. And you're gonna be like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't do my best because when I did my best, I got $1, right? Maybe I should do what I was doing before to get that 100. And we can use that, and Bart taught teaches that too, is the one example is send your dog to like a marker board, right? Or to a place. Send your dog to a place, give him a jackpot. Send your dog to a place, give him a jackpot. Send your dog to a place, give him a jackpot. Now, say your dog is going to the place, but it's slow. You click on the way there, and the dog expects his jackpot. Instead of giving the jackpot, you give one piece of kibble. And then he's like, man, that effort I didn't pay me what I thought, right? So he's
Major
like, next
disappointment.
time he will speed up because like I need to get to the place in order to get my jackpot. And he goes, I want to go fast because I don't want to give you time to click and give me that one piece of kibble. Right. So the kibble was a reward,
Exactly.
but it was demotivating for that particular behavior.
Yes, and that's the difference is
So it was
because
not reinforcing. Yeah. It was not
exactly, and that's
reinforcing.
and exactly, and that's what I was trying to say is that some people think just the act of giving something as a reward should strengthen the behavior. You can't there's no way for you to know that without observing the consequence of what happens to the behavior. Does the behavior go up or does it go down? You have to take in, there's a requirement for more observation. You need more information before that can
Correct.
happen, right?
And I think you, and the way to manipulate that now, yes, if there's no expectation by the dog or the person, whatever it is, right? Let's just say dog. If there's no expectation for the dog for that particular behavior on a certain reward, be it an amount or type, now I would say yes, that would be rewarding.
Sure.
But that's how you manipulate it is you create the expectation, and once the expectation is there, now you can change what you give in order to make it less rewarding, say, or more rewarding, maybe, right? And that's how, if you go to like service dog training, if you want pet dogs, maybe that's what you want is you want the motivation to be low. So the expectation you will keep always as one piece of kibble. And the
Exactly.
dog will keep its motivation low because it's like, oh, I'm just getting one piece of kibble. Of course, you get those dogs that doesn't matter what you give, they're just crazy, right? But for the most part, they will equate what they're doing with what they get,
Right.
right?
And this is why, and getting to the point that I was trying to make with being able to distinguish reinforcement is not reward and vice versa, is because if you read the quadrant as, so everyone says plus R or R plus and R negative is add a reward, remove a reward. That's false. Absolutely false. Because R positive is positive reinforcement. It means the behavior was reinforced and it was strengthened in its nature. It was increased in frequency, it increased in contingent or strength of quality of behavior. And then negative reinforcement, which is the correct way to read that quadrant, R negative, negative reinforcement, means that something was discontinued in order to reinforce that specific behavior that preceded the removal
Exactly.
of that stimulus,
That's the
right?
thing too. Go ahead.
Oh, just let me finish. Yeah. So but commonly people, because they use reinforcement and reward synonymously, they say reward with positive and they say take away reward is R negative. And I've seen that time and time again on social media, YouTube, it's out there everywhere. Even people in private lessons and coaching and businesses, they're teaching that, oh, hey, if you take something and withhold it from your dog, or you're negatively rewarding this dog, right? That you're still in the R negative quadrant. You're not. That's a negative punishment.
Correct. That's the opposite of positive reinforcement. When positive reinforcement, you give the reward.
Yep.
Negative punishment, you withhold the reward, right?
Exactly. And if you
Which,
can't, you go.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and if the thing that you're giving is not a punisher, like if what you're giving for reward, when you take it away, if that is not cause to punish or if it does not create a sense of FOMO or punishment in the dog, it's not a good reinforcer.
Correct. The dog didn't want it in the first place. So
Exactly.
you take it away,
Exactly.
it doesn't care. It's like, I didn't want it, so I don't care if you take it away.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like eating out of
Um,
boredom. You know, you're not eating because you need it. You're eating because there's nothing left to do.
because you're a fat bastard.
You heard it
I don't
here.
know. I I I can't pass a Cinnabon without ordering one though.
Hey, but you're not eating it because it's just there. You're eating it's reinforcing to you.
Correct. That's my
So
reward.
so if you bought the if you bought the Cinnabon and someone came and ripped it out of your hands
Oh,
and ran away, that
I
would be
can tell you.
extremely punishing.
I can tell you why it took me a long time to drink Stella beer again, because I was at a place and it was on draft and I ordered it and it was so bitter. It was the worst tasting beer I've ever had. It's like I remember the commercial, I think it was Keystone, where they had the bitter beer face. They had a commercial with bitter beer face. Like literally,
Been a while.
it was so bad tasting that it took me a long time to drink Stella again. Right. And it's because
You'll
what
offend a
happened,
lot of the Belgians for saying that.
well, hey, it wasn't the beer. I think it was the bar, they did it, whatever they had. Maybe
Uh-huh.
it was old or something.
I know a few people from Belgium that'll take umbrage with that.
But I do drink it now though.
Yeah, it's funny. That's it. So this is good. And that leads us to kind of this next conversation is like before we can even talk about the quadrant, we need to talk about the definitions, right? Or not just talking about the quadrant, before we talk about the uses and the strategic ways to arrive at certain aesthetics through and tactically how to do certain techniques. If we're just if we're settling for our definition of R positive as just the act of giving something away to the dog, right? Without looking at what it does to the quality of the behavior or the frequency, we're going to have a very weak foundation to build on with that dog in training. And it'll probably take us longer to arrive at results. I mean, positive reinforcement training takes long in the first place when you have a strong motivator, right? Because of the repetitions that are required to gain fluency and acquisition. But if you bring into play a weaker motivator or a weaker reinforcing addition,
Yeah.
you distance yourself further from your outcome and the timeline it takes to get there.
Yes. And that's why you have to be like really dialed in with your dog and know what they find reinforcing,
Yeah.
right? What do they want? Um, be it from food to toys to play to maybe pressure, maybe, you know, kind of pushing them around a little bit, the fight, right? And then looking and don't just say, okay, he's sad, I give him a ball, he's sad, I give him a ball. Don't just look at it as giving him something as a reward. Like you said, is that thing reinforcing the behavior?
Yes. Is the
Right.
behavior doing the thing you want it to do? Is it moving in the direction of strength or weakness? Meaning it's getting punished or moving towards extinction, acquisition and reinforcement in the other direction.
Yeah. And that's why I think your repetitions also matter in when you're training, especially in the beginning, because if you go too long, you can start, you can get to the point where you're kind of demotivating the dog, even though they like what you're giving them,
Yeah.
you know. Or if you just stay on one thing for too long, you keep it exciting. And then that's the power of the like a one rep with a jackpot, right? Where you just come out and surprise them. You just ask for one rep, boom, we're not doing it anymore. That's it. Here you go. And whatever that jackpot is, being food or play or whatever it is, right? Where that dog is like, wow, that was awesome. And then you had a good rep with high motivation, and that sticks in the dog's mind. You know,
So let's talk about, because I want to hear what you would say, like if you were to summarize what positive reinforcement is doing to a dog in training when we use positive reinforcement. Because I have in my mind like a synopsis or a summarized observation about the premise of positive reinforcement. But before we get to that question, what are things that matter in the use of good positive reinforcement once we have arrived at a reinforcer that is valuable, has value in the dog's eyes? So now let's take out the crappy motivators, and let's talk about when you have something that's really motivating to a dog, what are the benefits that come, the pros and the cons of positive reinforcement in dog training?
the pros and the cons. The pros, as in, well, one is the dog is doing a behavior in order to get that reward, whatever it is, right? So that's why they're doing it. And if it's something they really want, they will try to figure out how to get it, right? And they will do their best to try to get it. And especially that's where like manipulating it, you can manipulate how good or how well the dog does something, right? So they will try harder each time. That if they know, sprinting to you when you call them will get them that reward, they will, you know, if you can manipulate the reward, they will sprint faster next time, right? Up to their limit. And you can manipulate that and get it. The one con is that the dog is only doing a behavior to get that reward. And then, so that's where you have to make sure that in the environment you're in, that the dog actually wants what you have, right? Because if they don't, that's where they don't do the behavior, and that happens to uh, where we call like what we call engagement, right? Where they say your dog is not engaging with you in a different in this environment where there's competing motivators, because he actually doesn't want what you have as much as you thought, you
Right.
know. So that's the only the con with the positive reinforcement. The other con is that if you're only using positive reinforcement, that if the dog doesn't do something, there's no way to make them do it right then. Right? You can't, they don't want what you have, so you can't get them to do that in the moment. Right?
Right.
You can, like you said, use negative punishment, but now you have to wait until that
But
dog wants that again.
but the dilemma you face is if your dog no longer wants what you have, you can't take it away as a form of punishment.
Correct. But at some point, he did want what you had, right?
Right.
So there must be somewhere in there that he wants it.
Right. Which is why timing, you have to make sure your timing is good, right? You can't just like try to coax him and bribe him, and then after a while, once he loses that flame burns out of desire for working or,
Yeah.
playing or
But
chasing the food.
I think where people mess up is that, say you go to a new field and you offer your dog the ball and he doesn't want it, right? But he does like the ball. He does
Hmm.
want the ball.
Hmm.
If you go home and later on or the next day you play ball with your dog again, now in that moment you thought you were using negative punishment. You took the ball away the day before. But now if you give it to him, now you lost that
Right.
because he got it. He didn't have to pay attention to you in this new place.
Yes. So
So if you use that, you have to go back the next day before the only place he can play with that ball again is that same spot. And if he doesn't, you can't give it to him again, right? And
100%,
then you have to go back the next time until he
100%.
goes, okay, I really want the ball now because it's been 3 days. I thought I was going to get to play at home, for example, but I haven't, and now it's offered to me again. I'm going to take the opportunity to play it,
So
right? But
just I want to
yep,
summarize what you just said because I want to make sure that people follow that train of thought because so what he's saying, what Mike just said, that's super important that I really liked is that when you're on a field, you're on the training field, dog's not doing something you want, you take the opportunity away to play with the ball. Maybe it's a ball and string, a tug, a frisbee, whatever it is. Okay. And you go back home after ending that session, training's over, he lost it. It was a negative punishment opportunity. If that opportunity for that same reward that you took away as punishment is if it's brought about somewhere else and the dog has an opportunity to play with that somewhere else, the dog has just learned that he can be disobedient to you. He'll just get it somewhere else, right? He's just
correct.
being patient, right? But so like you said, the key component of using correct negative punishment with a toy in that situation is go he doesn't get the toy until he goes back to that same spot and chooses to engage and interact and work for that reward and then you reward him and boom, now you have your magic.
Yes, that's it. Correct. But that's why, like in NePoPo, we have aversive, right? Aversive stim, um, which is uh, adding something to stop a single behavior, you know. But that's why negative punishment is not truly aversive. It's
It
because
can't be.
you're the dog is deciding on a behavior, and then later, if you show them, hey, if you don't decide on the correct behavior, you're going to lose what you want. When you come back next time, it's not that it was aversive. He's like, now he's thinking, well, what behavior do I have to do to get this, the reward that I want? Say the ball in this case, right? In this instance. So they're just making a different choice. They're learning what choices or what behaviors work in that environment to get what they want. Again, it goes back to the dog getting what it wants, right? So, and it's not, that's the thing, it's just choosing different behaviors rather than avoiding a single behavior, you know?
That's the difficult thing when you rely on only positive reinforcement style training, the only option you have when your dog's not doing something you want it to do is to discontinue the opportunity to earn that reinforcement, which is essentially it's a play in the negative punishment quadrant, right? You've taken away that opportunity, you discontinue the training, or whatever it is. The benefits to that though are because it's not you're not forcing a decision on the dog immediately. There are the one upside to that is that there are no scars that are resulting from that use of feedback to the dog, right?
Mhm.
It takes time. That's the downside to it, is it requires the time to pass before the dog determines that that was a bad decision, right? He's like, gee, I went 2 days. I missed the ball, bit the owner's hand a little bit too hard. The toy went away for a week because I did that. Maybe not out of punishment, but maybe just because the owner couldn't throw the ball anymore. So he had to wait till his hand healed. And then the dog will learn real quickly, wow, gee, a week without my ball for biting the hand is not a good idea. I'm not going to bite the hand. I'm going to be a lot more careful and tiptoe around the string and make sure I actually grab the ball, right? But the negative punishment quadrant requires that time lapse to settle in with the dog before the realization is like, oh, I made a bad decision.
Correct.
Versus the immediacy of positive punishment that tells them that was a bad choice immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But you
But that's why
substitute that.
also,
Yeah, go ahead.
that's why in NePoPo we have the double punisher also, right? You can add the positive punishment to that behavior and negative punishment as a double. So you can actually show them like, not only do you need to make a different choice, but if you make that other choice again, it is going to be aversive for you.
It's the mother of all punishments, right?
Yeah.
You positively punish it and then you take the opportunity away and then they really have to think about it. The mother of all punishment.
Yep. Nice. So I mean before we talk about different negative punishments and stuff, but it's like you said, it just comes down to uh, negative punishment comes down to time and the dog understanding that it lost the opportunity for that reward.
There's this common there's a pretty an emerging movement within the balanced dog training community. They call it Lima, right? If you've listened to any of the modern dog training podcasts, you've probably heard it mentioned, um, referenced. Lima. It's an acronym. It stands for least invasive, minimally aversive method or approach to using punishment tools to train a dog. And I'd like to ask your thoughts about it. So why don't you kind of kick off? What are your thoughts about that? And when do you feel like that approach has a place? Because I mean, I think it does have a place, and I think it's great that people have identified that as a method of training. But I think there are some things that people need to be aware of with that method as well. That probably make for a good conversation.
Well, two things, right? First is that the definition of aversive, right? Because aversive is something that the dog would really want to avoid,
Right.
right? That it's super unpleasant.
So can you be,
The-
is it a misnomer? Can you actually be minimally aversive?
well, I know that's the point. Is if it's aversive, it's aversive. You can't be minimally aversive,
Right.
right?
It's like it's like saying, I shot him just a little. He's just a little dead. I didn't kill like
It's a
I
mere
didn't
flesh wound.
overkill him.
It's a flesh wound.
I just shot him with like a BB, but he's still dead. He's just a little dead.
That's you go to Monty Python, right? It's a flesh wound. But that's the point. If it's aversive, the dog will want to avoid it.
Hmm.
So if they're saying minimally aversive, is like they're not going to use, and that's a problem. They use aversive on a spectrum, right? Where for us in NePoPo, aversive is not on a spectrum. It's negative reinforcement kind of thing. That's why we say like correction slash punishment. And then aversive, which is highly unpleasant, which is used to stop behavior. Um, but the other thing is that when you think that, it's like you're trying to toe the line of just enough. You know, the problem is you don't know what just enough is for this particular dog in front of you, right? Especially if it's not your dog and you're a trainer and you're training the dog for somebody else. You don't know the dog. You know, maybe your dog you do know, but still, even with your dog, they go in and out of motivation. Like like Khan, my Dutchie. This morning he doesn't, he wants, if you're going in the house, he wants to be in the house before you get in there. So Tara was walking, she had the sliding glass door, and it's a heavy one. It's like, I mean, it's a it's original doors were like metal, not, aluminum kind of thing. Like it's a very heavy door. And he tried to squeeze in between her leg and the door and actually knocked the door, the sliding glass door, off the rail with his shoulder.
Oh wow.
Okay. And like, really, it's aversive, right? If you think about it, the amount of pressure that was used, and he hit himself hard. You heard the bang. But he's going to do it again tomorrow. So obviously that was not aversive to him, because if it was, he would avoid that next time. But he didn't feel it like we thought he should have felt it. It wasn't pain. And that's the thing. If you're trying to just barely get enough, what is enough for that dog, to get him to change his behavior? You don't know. So when you're doing least invasive, minimally aversive, it's like, I think a lot of times you are going to be falling short, and you're going to be stopping that pressure at the wrong time, and it's not going to cause a change of behavior, and you'll actually end up reinforcing the wrong behavior because the pressure stopped
Okay.
while the wrong behavior is happening, right? Because you're going into negative reinforcement there. So, and that's the thing. It's like, don't think of what's the minimum amount I can use. You have to think of what's the appropriate amount.
You know, this just made me laugh. I was just thinking as you're talking. Lima is like it, it's it's an anthropomorphic acronym because we're projecting the emotion that we want to be perceived as being as gentle as possible to deliver something that really is designed to create a scar, right? Because scars, like if you touch a hot stove, you're going to get burned. You'll probably have a scar, right? You'll lose your fingerprint or something like that, right? Um, we're banking on the fact that that aversive event is going to prevent them from doing something dangerous to themselves or to something in their environment in the future. That's what we're banking on, right? But least invasive, minimally aversive, it's like using the analogy like, hey, I'm going to neuter my dog to fix his nuisance barking at my neighbor's dog. Well, I I desexed my dog, but it's okay because I gave him anesthesia while I was doing it. So it was the least invasive, minimally aversive experience to the dog to try to do it. But it's like maybe that's a bad analogy, but like it just made me laugh because when people say that they're going to desex a dog to fix behavior, that's what they're really doing is like, and that's they justify the surgical invasion of a dog's anatomy. They justify it because, oh, well, the dog doesn't feel anything. We use humane anesthesia. We give them cones and we give them lots of treats and they're on blankets. Like, no, it's still absolutely almost abhorrent to be able to do that for a behavioral fix that should otherwise be fixed with training. And
Yeah.
so it just makes me laugh. And
But it gets, um not only that, but what I get, it gets to the training part of it. Okay. I think what it does, and I could be wrong, right? I don't know. But it gets, people will try to turn, like if they're using pressure, for example, okay, they will try to turn off the pressure as soon as the behavior happens. But the problem is the pressure has to stay past the behavior, right? The dog has to have done the behavior and then the pressure stop. You can't try to time it. For example, say when the same example everybody uses, the sit. You cannot time the pressure stopping with the butt touching the ground. You have to time it with after the butt touches ground so that the behavior turns off the pressure, right? When you do it the other way, which is what people that are, in my opinion, that are thinking of Lima, they're like, I don't want the pressure to stay on longer than is necessary.
Mm.
So they're trying to time it exactly, and you cannot. You can't time it exactly. And then you become not clear to the dog, right? Their communication breaks down because you're not noticing when the dog's butt hits the ground, if they're hovering, if they're down, if they're fully committed, right? If they just barely touch it. And then you add the reinforcer in there, right? I mean, the reward. And if you mess with the reward, did you reward the dog's butt hovering? Did you reward it 100% down? Right? Was the dog down and started coming up and you rewarded? That's where you get all that, the jumpiness in the behaviors.
Yeah.
So the pressure, yes, it it can be aversive, but most of the time you'll know right away if it's aversive. And that's why you can't have that spectrum of aversive. It's aversive or it's not.
Yeah, it's on or off. It's black or white,
Yeah.
right? It can't be minimally. Again, it's using the analogy. You can't be a little bit dead. You have to be, you're dead or you're not, right?
Yeah. And then that's the thing. If you're trying to make behavior happen with pressure, then you're using negative reinforcement, right?
It's a
If you're
one or a
trying to stop
zero.
behavior, you're using an aversive.
Yeah. And so back to my question to you is uh, like for me, and maybe tell me if you agree or you think of it differently, but for me, when I think about positive or just for reinforcement or punishment, all we're doing is we're manipulating the dog's anticipation one way or another in a different direction. We're creating anticipation that something good is going to happen as a result of a certain behavior, or something bad is about to happen as a result of a certain behavior. It's nothing more or less than that, right?
Yes. Yeah. The anticipation, like your anticipation, and then your, which leads to expectation
Mm-hmm.
of something. But remember, the strength comes from by not giving the reward,
Yep.
right? And you're still reinforcing it, even though you don't give the reward, but later. Like if we remember the dopamine jackpot, when did the biggest spike happen? The biggest spike started happening after the reward became a maybe,
Yes.
you know. And that's the other thing, if with positive reinforcement, you cannot keep on 100%, you know, reinforcement schedule. You have to move to the maybe. Maybe you will get it, maybe you won't,
Right.
you know.
And that's the trickiest thing
Oh,
for most pet owners, right? Is going from the reward one-to-one reward to one to the intermittent reward.
yes. And that's why getting away from the word reward, reinforcement, that's why you should also, your
Mm-hmm.
negative reinforcement should be a maybe also,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe it'll be on this time, maybe it won't, and that along with the maybe you'll get the reward, maybe you won't, that's what really strengthens the behaviors. It's the maybe. Can I beat this pressure, or will I get the reward or won't I?
Exactly.
Perfect.
So to recap, because we've kind of been like
Oh,
talking a lot of things.
I have something.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
The other thing with Lima is if you're trying to stop behavior, right? And for us, we're going to use an aversive. That again, if you're subscribing to the Lima, you're going to try to use the minimum amount necessary to stop that behavior. But again, we kind of mentioned before, if you don't use enough, you're not going to stop that behavior.
And
So you
what
have to
happens?
go past what you think. If you think it's a 6 out of 10 to stop the digging in the yard, You cannot use 6 out of 10, even if you think that's the correct one. You got to use like an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, because you want to make sure that what you did is aversive for that behavior. And
Yes.
remember, every behavior has a different level of aversive to it.
And because if you don't go into known aversive territory or perceived aversive territory for the dog, if you don't go there, then you're only negatively reinforcing that behavior. You're making it stronger because they're learning to endure moderately high level or moderate levels of pressure to accomplish their designs or their goals and behavior that we don't want them to do. So that's why least invasive, minimally aversive by the standard practitioner, the typical pet owner, is probably just a formula for negatively reinforcing something they don't want their dog to do.
Yep. And you see that when people get like electronic collar and don't get any training, like pet people especially, and they put it on their dog and they let their dog off leash, and the collar is from whatever 1 to 100, and they go, oh, 30 should be good, right? They let their dog out, and the dog takes off running. They call the dog, and the dog goes, I'm not coming, right? You don't have a leash on me. And they stim at that level, whatever it is, 30, 40, and the dog speeds up, still continuing to run away from them. And then what do? Is they let go of the button and they go, oh, that didn't work. Right? But it actually did work. It just didn't work with what you thought. Right? In that case, you just taught the dog, when I feel stim, I speed up and run faster away from you,
Yeah.
you know? Whereas, I mean, uh if you had gone higher, for the most part, most dogs will just stop. If it is aversive,
Right.
most dogs will stop in that case because it is to the point where it stops everything. But then we get into the NePoPo uses of the e-collar, and we're getting into like cutting drive instead of
Mm-hmm.
um,
Right.
the other uses. But that's the thing, right? In that case, the person thought it was an aversive, and it didn't become an aversive. It became negative reinforcement for that one behavior of running away from you.
Right. And I mean, I think the method and the movement behind Lima, I think it obviously, like I said in the beginning, I think it's an anthropomorphic view on training to create something that is palatable by people who aren't comfortable with the balance community or the use of tools or the use of pressure. I think it was I think it was conceived for those people so that they can digest that there might be a possible way to use pressure that accomplishes good training results without the scars that they have from their observations of abusive trainers using tools unfairly, inhumanely, on the spectrum that we don't support, right? Because there is a crowd of people that use tools that way that we don't support. So I think Lima again was conceived to be kind of that standard bearer to carry the torch for those people. But what it really has become is a Trojan horse for the force-free, the anti-tool, the animal rights camps to then like adopt it. Because I think as we go more and more, because I've been around a lot of conversations and you see people throwing out Lima left and right, and you even see some of the force-free people saying, well, Lima's okay. And they start saying, but you have to use Lima this way, and you can't use that type of tool in Lima. And now it's not even Lima as it was conceived; it's Lima as it's been translated by the force-free community.
Yeah. And the and it also, I think it stops people from using pressure, adding pressure in the beginning of training,
It does, absolutely.
right? And they become like Popo trainers because they only add it later, is they don't use the power of like negative reinforcement. They just
Absolutely.
go into, I'm going to train with positive and then I'll stop behavior with pressure.
That's 100% right.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, and like you said, it's more of a trying to make it seem like I'm not a bad guy. I'm using pressure, but I'm using it just barely enough to get what I want,
I'm just going to kill
right?
my dog a little bit. He'll come back to life in 5 seconds, but yeah, I'm going to kill him a little bit, right? You know,
Yeah, that's why it's not a good term.
if you get shot with a 22 and you die and your heart stops, you're still dead, whether you got hit with a 22 caliber pistol or a right or
Yeah,
like a freaking cannonball, right? Like it doesn't matter. You're dead, you know.
that's true. Minimally aversive.
It was he was under anesthesia, but we still desexed him and like invasively removed his organs, like what could go wrong, right? Of course his behavior is going to be better now, right? Like give me a break.
Yeah,
So
but
it's
yeah, but and that's the thing, right? If it's aversive or it isn't, it's not 1% aversive, 5% aversive, 10% aversive.
and again,
It's
and aversive is we want the scar. We want the memory of the bad experience because that's what informs the dog's future behavior. Without that memory, behavior in the future is not avoided that we find undesirable, right? It's that memory, it's that association with, gee, touching that fence was electric. I didn't like that. I'm not going near that fence again. And I have respect for the fence, right? Um, you know, uh it's like people that have a hard time with like it's like respect begins with a little bit of fear, you know? Like there's some sort of like magnitude of discrepancy between two sources of power. One's here and one's up above it. That's what forms respect. Like is that little bit of fear, right? But but fear is such a horrible word to people nowadays, right? If you were to say it this way, my dog is afraid of running out into the street, or my dog is afraid of getting hit by a car, that's a good thing. I want my dog to be afraid of getting hit by a car because it's going to keep my beloved companion alive. If he's afraid of getting hit by a car, he's not going to be out there running, chasing cars and trying to bite the tires or the wheels. That's a
yeah,
good fear.
exactly.
That's a very good fear to have. That's a fear that every pet owner should probably want their dog to have. But yet, when they hear the word fear, it's such a negative connotation, right?
Yeah. But and um it's using what you need to get the outcome that you want, right? So if you have to make your dog fearful of running out of the house because there's a busy street there, right? But then do that because you're going to keep the dog alive,
And
you
if
know?
you can do it the way NePoPo does it, which is gets the behavior you want while the dog looks good doing it, then we've arrived at a really cool method of training your dog, right? So if you can have your dog respectful, aka fearful of getting hit by a car, and he's willing to recall back to you really quickly when you see the Amazon truck flying down your neighborhood, at 40 miles an hour, and he recalls really quickly because he's got, that motivation, that respect. It's a good system. It's a good method for training.
Yeah, exactly. Very
Why
nice.
here's the question I have is like you take two dogs, okay? And we always seem to we circle back to this this conversation in all of our uh conversations, but if you take two dogs, one that's been trained, um let's say one that's been trained with positive reinforcement only, right? Maybe praise, lots of rah verbal praise and things like that. And let's say that that dog gets really nice healing. Okay. Let's take another dog who maybe they use some positive reinforcement, but they also use some negative reinforcement. And then the occasional punishment when the dog doesn't want to look and looks away, right? But that dog also looks equally good. So let's say you have two dogs that look just as good in their healing. Does it matter what road they took to get there?
Yeah, if you see the dog and they're both happy in doing the behaviors and they're doing them consistently, in any environment, and then you really can't tell how they were trained, then what's the difference?
Because
Just how you feel, or the difference is how you feel, right?
and that's the thing I'm trying to point out is that like the FCI World Championships just happened. And in IGP, the sport of IGP, at least, the points that are being given or taken away in the obedience section are no longer technicalities. They're not technique based point deductions. They are emotional point deductions. Like when you told the dog to down or stand out of from a run, in while you're in motion with the dog, and you tell your dog to plot, or you tell your dog to stand or sit. Did the dog's ears flop down and flop up, or show some stress, or did the dog's tail kind of tuck a little bit, or drip or drop a little bit? Right? Those are the point deductions that are happening. They're all the behaviors are technically very correct, right? They're precision behaviors, they're sniper type behaviors. The points that are being deducted are emotion based points, right? So all the dogs are technically correct, but not all the dogs are trained with rah. Like some are. There's some that are on the podium that are only rah trained dogs, right? But there's some that are very fluent with the use of pressure, consequence, and even at a high the ultimate level, like the world championship level, there's a disparity of points, but maybe like maybe 3 points out of 300 points that are showing the difference between the two dogs.
Yeah.
You know,
And the thing is that most of the dogs have been trained with pressure,
sure.
right? Whether they say it or not.
Or acknowledge and admit it is more
Yeah.
like it.
But I think the difference is this, because we're going away from Lima a little bit, but kind of not. The positive reinforcement only trained dogs, remember, they are choosing a different behavior, right? Because the only way to correct that is negative punishment. So they are choosing the correct behavior to get what they want, right? So later, those other choices are still there in the background. They're just not as strong. But when you add pressure correctly, you are removing those other choices, right? And you're telling the dog, no, this is the only choice you can make, which I believe is better when it comes down to it, because now they're not thinking about what other behavior can I do. They're thinking about like, this is the only behavior, and I have to avoid the other behaviors.
Right.
I think that's the big difference.
Super interesting. But it was what spurred this for me is like I had just seen in some online forums and chat groups that, you know, some people who were claiming to be force free, purely positive, were throwing around Lima like it was something they were adopting. And I'm like, what they were describing Lima as was like, I'm like, oof, that's a really like, you know, that's a bastardized form of Lima, in the beginning. And yeah, really, really interesting to see some of
Well,
the
that's because they would think,
interpretations on it.
well, to them, I think their negative punishment would be aversive. They
Right.
would look at it as aversive, which it's not.
Right. So I think that covers it. I mean, I really think we dove into positive reinforcement, the reasons to use it, the benefits, the aesthetics, the flash, the political correctness of it, and the ability to avoid scars. The problems with it come from the requirement of time to arrive at a acquired behavior through positive reinforcement, the time it takes to make negative punishment effective on a dog, because it doesn't have a directional component. Like you said, negative punishment does not say don't do this, do something else. It says do this or don't do this, and then it leaves it open-ended as to what the dog might be able to do elsewhere, and then they have to go through the learning process again. So it's a non-directional form of punishment. It doesn't guide the dog to a better behavior. It just says don't do this, but it takes them like months, weeks to learn that. But it does so in favor of avoiding the risk of potential scarring on the dog if you don't know how to use positive punishment correctly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Um, so everybody should train with NePoPo.
So
They
to
won't have that problem.
summarize this.
Train with NePoPo, and you won't have that problem.
Go to Silver School, C is for gold,
Exactly.
and continue to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast, the Full Quadrant podcast, which, by the way, we are also now available on Apple Podcasts for your listening pleasure.
That's right.
So that's a big announcement. Long time coming.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. I haven't gone on there yet to see, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go on there and play some episodes.
Yes,
Check
do
it
it.
out.
Rate us with 5 stars. Do it under the knowledge that this is a completely self-produced production. This is something that we're just putting out there. We understand this is like a low budget operation, and it's more about the content than it is about the cinematic experience. However, hopefully to our listeners, they're listening for the benefit of the quality of the content, not the quality of the aesthetics and the production. We do our best to provide what we can in a quality manner, but again, we're the Joe Rogan podcast is gonna just we're not even the same universe. Like it's a completely different experience. He has a dedicated building for his podcast. He's got doctors that attend to you before you go into his podcasting room, because
Really?
most of the people, yeah, well, yeah, because most of the people there are like, they're getting high, they're on weed, mushrooms, micro dosing, right? So they have on-call nurses and doctors, physicians. So it's like, definitely a completely different universe of a program. Not that I have anything against it, but like we're just not that quality at all. So we would appreciate all your 5 stars, all of your
Yes,
likes, all
please.
of your shares, all of your comments, all of your feedback, your engagement. It really does help us out. And it just fuels our enjoyment of being able to record these conversations and share them with you. So,
Yeah. Yeah, if you like these or if you think anybody else would enjoy them too, just
yeah.
share them to everybody.
So,
Uh,
anyways,
especially if you disagree.
yes, haters are fine. Send them our way. We'll respectfully chat with them and hear them out.
Cool.
So, all right. Well, hey, super,
Um,
super conversation, Mike. Really enjoyed it. Really looking forward to seeing you this week. We're gonna have a great week of training and some really good times. So,
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we will I'll see you soon and then I look forward to recording the next one.
yes, yep, awesome.
Cool.
Okay,
All right,
all
man.
right. Well, hey, that was a good one. I
Talk to
think
you later.
yeah, we'll talk to you later. See you, Mike. Bye.
Peace.